Alright guys, welcome back to another MCreator tutorial. Today we're going to be looking at procedure dependencies, and we'll be looking at the different ways that it's displayed. So there's a couple different ways it's going to be displaying, and I'll be also covering what happens when you add a dependency that doesn't support that particular trigger, and I'll also be covering custom dependencies as well, giving you a assignment for this week. So let's go ahead and start with our global trigger, and then we'll be working into the elements as you'll have the fundamentals to kind of understand that. So let's go to the global one. I'm going to select a trigger here for the green block, and I'm just going to type hurt. This is what this trigger is actually meant for. And as you can see on the side here, we have a tab in the center called required dependencies. These are the dependencies that when you're adding blocks to your green block here, it will pop up certain dependencies. For example, if we go ahead and grab the time here and set the time, you can see that we have a world dependency here. You might not have this warning right off the bat if it's a brand new procedure. Basically what this means is you need to make sure that this value is matching the provided dependencies, which is below that in the global triggers. So for example, we do have world dependency, so it will save properly. And we also have X, Y, and Z amount, which is a custom one, source entity, and damage source. So if we play around with some of these blocks, you can see that the dependencies will change depending on the type of block that we're basically adding. So this one's entity, and then we have source entity, and then we have our coordinate blocks, which is X, Y, and Z. As you can see, we can use all of these different types of blocks in this particular trigger, which is really cool. When you're working with ones that don't actually support the thing, you might get a warning when you're working with a global trigger. In this case, it's saying the dependency isn't supported. We try to export it, it will give us an error with at least global procedures. When we're saving it, you can see that we can save it just fine. So if we go to the advanced tab and scroll down, there are certain ones that say dependency name. So these are certain dependency types. They correlate to the colors on the provided dependencies tab, or in the cases of elements, they'll also coordinate to the tags that are under the name. We'll be covering that in just a second. So for example, amount is a dark blue one. We can see that we need this block right here for it, and we're going to match the exact same spelling and case sensitive values of the dependency. So in this case, what we want to do is amount, and this will get the amount of damage, for example, when this entity is hurt. So we can see right here we are getting the amount, and that checks out. It doesn't give us an error. When you're working with certain other ones, they might have capital letters after the first letter, which is pretty common in encoding. So for example, hit X is another common one that you might find on some blocks or other entities or things like that, which does not support in this particular trigger, but in some other ones it does. There's also X, Y, and Z for those ones. So that's basically your custom dependencies. A lot of them are pretty common, like the entity and source entity, as well as your X, Y, and Z and world. So those are all pretty common ones to come across. So let's pop open the block, go to the triggers tab, and you'll notice that there's certain trigger names. So on block right clicked, there is when block is placed by, so when it's placed by a block or another entity. When block is added, that's another one that is basically similar to the block placed by, but it's basically even with if the state changes, it will basically count as it as well. But you might notice that there's a whole bunch of different tags underneath of them, like those hit X, hit Y, and hit Z ones that I mentioned earlier. So those are all the provided dependencies like we had in our procedure here for a global trigger. It says provided dependencies. Basically, those are our provided dependencies for this particular trigger. You might also notice that a lot of the block ones support X, Y, and Z in world, because blocks are generally found in the world at certain locations. So most triggers in this particular list will always have those in some way or another. In some cases, other entities or things like that might not support all of them or some of them, and it will really vary depending on the trigger that it's running from. If we open up this trigger, you will also notice there isn't a provided dependencies list. You'll have to correlate that to your trigger itself. So you might need to go between the two to determine where the dependencies are supported. When you're saving certain dependencies that are not supported by the trigger, it's not going to give you a error. So if we go ahead and grab the trigger direction, it says make sure that the trigger supports it, but if we save it, then it will remove it from our trigger and it will mark it as missing dependencies in the list here. To fix that issue, what you do is you just go and open up that and remove the dependencies that are not supported, and then make sure that it matches your trigger that you're wanting it for, and then save it. And then it should show up in this list right here, even without needing to relaunch the element that you're editing. So we can select that again and edit it. So with that being said, your assignment for this week is to go ahead and choose a global trigger, anyone in this list. It doesn't matter which one. You're just going to practice on matching the required dependencies with your provided dependencies. You can choose any one of these as your one that you're going to be using, and you're going to basically use the print block, which can be found under the text and then print. We'll be covering this block in the next episode, but what you're going to be using it for now is any dependency ones that have conditions like this. You're going to use that as a baseline to put your blocks on to match the dependency types. So in this case, I had the hurt one. You can use that one, or you can go ahead and use a different one. I suggest doing something a little bit different than the one that I have, because then you can kind of find the blocks and practice with a brand new procedure trigger. It's up to you how you want to do it. Just practice matching up the dependencies that are in the provided dependencies with the ones that are under the ones that you add under the required dependencies. And that will be your assignment for the week. Next tutorial, we'll be covering the print block and how script actually runs in this procedure editor. So not just limited to global events, but for the procedure in general. So definitely tune in for that, and I'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching. Peace out.